Hello, everyone, and welcome to our RPO podcast. I'm really excited about today because I have our first female podcast guest, Sara Andrews. Now, what I want to start off with is telling you about how I come to know Sara and a little bit about the work I've done with her. And then I'm going to let her introduce herself because it's a very interesting journey that Sara has on her own and that we've been through together. So I met Sara, I think it's got to be about 7 years ago, and she was working in HR as a very senior level with Johnson Controls. And Sara and I have actually worked together on 2 RPO projects, one for Johnson Controls and another RPO project for Brush electrical machines. And that was a fantastic experience. Now, I'm going to let Sara tell you about herself because she's not currently in manufacturing, which is interesting because she's one of those rare people that at very senior level has managed to completely change sectors. And her journey, as I keep saying, is very interesting. And I am particularly interested in it because I am interested in females in manufacturing. So Sara, let me hand it over to you. Can you just give us a little bit of your CV? Tell us a bit about, your journey, where you started. So where you started in manufacturing, I think. Where did you start?
I did. So thank you, Cherie. Yes, I did. I started at the tender age of 16 with a choice between whether I stayed on at school and did my A-levels or whether I embarked on an apprenticeship. So back in 1987, apprenticeships were being offered by all of the main manufacturers. And I was kind of really fortunate to be offered about 7 of those. So back at the time, it was Jaguar, Rover, there was Dunlop, there was Massey Ferguson's, Peugeot was still around. And I just found that I had a real aptitude for the process of being interviewed, the testing that was done, and then being able to do some of the problem-solving tests that they gave you. So I made the decision to move to join Jaguar Cars, and I joined as a technical apprentice. So I had 4 years, basically in overalls and boots. So my first year was in the training school. So I did all of the basic engineering skills from electrical to milling to CNC and lathes, to fabrication and into the drawing office to learn geometric tolerancing. And then I had 2 years where I went out into Jaguar's factories on a rotation basis. So I spent some time at the Browns Lane factory, at the Castle Bromwich factory, and in the design centres. But I was always destined to finish my apprenticeship in manufacturing. That was always my destination. So when I finished in 91, I went to Castle Bromwich and spent probably about 13 years there in the paint shop at the time. So we were owned by Ford. We were part of the Premier Automotive Group, and Castle Bromwich really had to turn its plant around if it wanted any investment in new models in new model years. So a lot of my work there was focused on facilities and process improvement, improving quality, and helping the turnaround team in that plant get to a point where we could secure new models being placed into our factory. I had a very accelerated career. So I started as an engineer, became a senior engineer, project engineer, principal engineer, and then I had no senior engineer, I had no engineering director. So I was sort of doing that job for about 2 years, but quite honestly, without the salary, without the recognition, and having had various conversations, I was always promised that engineering director role. And it never came along quickly enough at Jaguar, but Tom Walkinshaw Racing made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And that was to be their head of manufacturing. Tom Walkinshaw Racing were a Formula One team, so you might remember them as being sponsored by Red Bull. So it was the Orange Arrows. They had a fantastic facility in Oxfordshire, which was part engineering services, but part Formula One racing.
Wow.
So hugely exciting opportunity for me. But our engineering work was low volume, niche market, bespoke engineering solutions for all of the global automotive providers. So that gave me the opportunity to travel the world. So I worked in the US, I worked in France on the Renault Clio Sport, I worked in Sweden, putting all of that body kit together. Wow. And then I worked for General Motors in China on a joint Chinese venture, which was fabulous. In about 2003-ish, I came back from China, and PricewaterhouseCoopers were in the canteen, basically making everybody redundant because the Formula One team had spent all the money and engineering services hadn't earned enough to feed their Formula One habit. So about 6 weeks later, I joined Johnson Controls. They're a global organization, and I joined their automotive division. But the interesting thing about that was I was then a program director for Jaguar cars. So the company that I worked for 13 years was now my customer. So that was, it was great for me in that I knew how Jaguar worked. I still had connections, and so that transition was quite easy, but very, very different seeing it from a first tier automotive supplier position, which is tough. At that point, about 2004-ish, I was program director. So I had about 6 different new model programs going on for Jaguar, which was a whole range of new model launches, facelifts, and interior design changes. So we did the seating, some cockpit, and some interior components for them. And I had my first child. I went straight back to work after a few weeks because we were in the middle of the launch of the Discovery. And then really sort of got to a point where I just couldn't work the hours of the day that were needed to fulfill that job, quite frankly, without social services knocking on the door, and me being an incompetent mother. So by pure chance, I had been doing some work with our American team, and it was on the back of the Sarbanes-Oxley crisis, where we were having to reinforce some of our operating processes for our business units. So these were the financial processes. Our vice president of HR just happened to catch me one day. We got chatting, and he said, I could really do with somebody like you in HR. And I said, well, you know, I'm not a HR person, I'm an engineer, quite proud of that fact. And he said, well, you know, could we have a conversation? So I said, well, I don't know anything about HR. I kind of, you know, I like tolerances and processes and things that kind of fit and go together. And he said, well, that's exactly what I want. I want somebody that, you know, that doesn't come from a human resources background, because actually the change we need to make is all about process improvement, adding value, being commercially minded, growing and developing our people, and getting the best out of the resource that we have. And I said, well, actually, if I'm honest, I'm struggling, you know, with balancing the current job with having a new baby. And so that was kind of my move into the world of HR. Yeah, absolutely. So it was very much around products and program delivery, not just for the UK, but across Europe. So I got to work in a European team, and then somehow became HR director. I can't exactly recall how that happened.
Just happened.
It just happened. So I kind of then got a bit confident, thought I could do a few things well, and I'd been at Johnson Controls for 12 years, so I made the move to Metis Aerospace. The attraction for me was it was private equity owned, a much smaller business, and I had the opportunity to do a turnaround for people in HR ready for a sale. So it was a very, very specific role, which gave me the opportunity to put everything I'd learned in a big corporate into practice in a much smaller aerospace business, and learn a little bit about the aerospace industry too. When I sort of finished that, I moved to Brush Electrical Machines. So again, still in the manufacturing sector, and still loving being in and around factories, processes, operations, and being able to see things being built. And I joined as their group HR director. They manufactured generators, so they're in the power industry, so huge generators for auxiliary power. And then sort of kind of became their ops director as well as their HR director.
As you do.
Yeah. And so really focused on building the relationship with the unions, really driving process improvement, building engagement and building morale across the business, and turning that plant around ready for investment. So after a few years, I then was approached by Mattioli Woods, who are a financial organisation. So they're wealth management and financial providers of pensions and personal investment. And decided that it was time for me to take a step out of manufacturing, having worked in various different aspects of manufacturing, and moved into professional services, which was a huge change, but an opportunity to understand a bit about another sector and how another sector works. And I think in all of that, one of the things I really kind of learned was the challenges and the issues and the things that you need to take care of with your people are the same. You know, it really doesn't matter where you work. They are all the same challenges in terms of building high performing teams, driving engagement, creating the right culture, and enhancing performance. So stayed with Mattioli Woods for just over 3 years, and then moved sector again into healthcare, which was just, you couldn't have written the script given the pandemic.
I know, unbelievable. What timing.
So so I joined Independent Clinical Services as their chief people officer, and we're in the healthcare sector, and very similar to Mattioli Woods, had grown by acquisition, and we are a collection of 22 different healthcare brands for resourcing, managed services, and community work.
I tell you what,
that's me.
Amazing. So I'm kind of doing a bit of adding up here, and I hope you don't mind me saying this is a 34-year career. Is that right?
Yeah, there's something like that.
Okay, this is good. Now, the reason that I was really excited about this one today is because obviously you and I both know, working in manufacturing, particularly when you start looking at senior levels, we're mostly dealing with guys, aren't we?
We know
that. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed working with you in manufacturing and in wealth management, and now latterly in healthcare. And one of the things I wanted to focus on a little bit was women in manufacturing. Now, you and I have worked together on 2 RPOs. And you understand RPO works at shop floor level. And we both know at shop floor level, I've worked with all male teams. I have actually now all worked with all female teams. One of our latest RPOs that we've undertaken is probably about 75% females on the shop floor.
Right.
Interestingly, though, as soon as you start getting up above team leader level, it's all men. And it is just interesting is the word that I would apply to it. You have, and I think it's a fantastic example of someone who started as an engineer, and when you did your apprenticeship, were there many other females doing your engineering apprenticeship?
No, there was 2 of us, and we're still best friends today.
Oh, bless.
Yes, 2 of us.
So 2 of you. So you'd think traditionally, and I know engineering is trying to attract more females. And I would desperately love to get more females in on our RPOs at team leader level. I always say to my site leaders, when they talk to me about their morale and engagement problems, sometimes I like to say, well, this is dead easy to solve. You just need to recruit a few more females into this environment. And they just chuckle and laugh. And then they tell me that the females wouldn't want to work in that environment. And I can kind of get that. So the journey was engineering, then through to HR, and then if I'm hearing it right,
and a bit of project management in between. So I went engineering,
then back to HR. Now I've got to ask it. Have you found yourself back in HR because it was hard, do you think, to make it in operations as a female? Is that got, I'm just trying to be a bit controversial, has got anything to do with it?
Not specifically, I wouldn't say. I think I've kind of bobbed between operations and HR in kind of recent years, depending on what the job needs and what my skill set can offer.
Okay.
To be honest, I personally find HR more rewarding because we're focused on developing people and growth. But I absolutely love my operational past. I mean, I just the opportunity to get back into a factory or a manufacturing environment. Well, that's kind of where I grew up, really.
Yep.
So I wouldn't say harder, but I would say different challenges. And of
Right.
course, depending on where you are in life in your career, operational roles, particularly in manufacturing, are somewhat rigid in terms of hours that you work and where you need to be. So, and I think, quite honestly, for women at certain times in their life, that's okay. But you do get to a point, particularly when you have children, where you do need a little bit more tolerance, a bit more flexibility. Not that you're going to work any less hard, but you need to know that if you need to go somewhere and there's an emergency, that you've got that freedom to do it, because the stress of knowing that there might be a phone call or you might need to just go and do something. And even though, in my experience of manufacturing environments, you're told, oh, that's okay, you know that really it isn't.
Absolutely.
And I think that's that for females is and for women is a real something that the industry really needs to kind of get over, to get to that genuine mindset of flexibility.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now there's something else I want to ask you as well, because because you're uniquely positioned to understand this, I think. Engagement and productivity at shop floor level. Now, obviously, engagement is generally considered to belong to the realms of HR to do to the business. We both know that isn't how it should work. But you, having been in operations, and having been in HR, how much of a link do you feel there is between engagement at operational level and productivity at operational level? And I'm talking about operational level as being traditionally shop floor level rather than the levels above, because different engagement motivators there. How close do you think correlation is between engagement and productivity?
For me, they're almost one and the same. They're directly linear in their proportions. And when I think back to taking over as plant director at Brush Electrical Machines, and what we achieved in that year to 2 years that I was in that role, just by having a different style.
How did you change the style? How was it different?
So it was more open, a lot more communication. It was a lot more being present on the shop floor. But I'm going to be really honest and say, probably a man's conversation when they're walking around the shop floor is about the football results at the weekend, or what the beer was like in the pub the night before. As a female, you don't have those conversations. You're asking about an individual's holiday, family, children. It's a much more personal conversation that you can have. And that really drives engagement, because whether you're male or female, everybody wants to feel important and everybody wants to feel that they're cared for. And I think the style and the topics and the tone is a very, very different, naturally different with women in those manufacturing leadership roles. It's just natural to have that. It brings a different style of communication.
You're making me laugh. I'm thinking about a couple of the RPOs we've got going at the moment, where it's all guys, automotive industry, and it's all guys. They range in age from 16 up to about 65, but they're all guys. And I've just done a round of one-to-ones with the existing team leaders. I think there's about 9 of them in this particular site. And it's absolutely fascinating in these one-to-ones. And they've all been on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you know, obviously at the moment where we've got COVID-19.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because you are so right. They open up very quickly to me. And their concerns and issues in a 60-minute conversation, 10 minutes is around the practicalities of production. And the other 50 minutes is all about emotions.
Yeah.
And yet, when you go into the factory and you talk to everybody, those emotions don't feature in anything.
Yeah.
You know, it would be the other way around. It'd be 59 minutes on the practicalities of production, and the only emotion you'd see if someone was having a bit of a tantrum or something over something.
Yeah.
And it is a drum I keep banging.
Yeah.
And it's quite, because I agree with you, absolutely right. People just want to feel important and recognized for what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's how I used to find out my best information by just going and having, you know, a cup of coffee with the maintenance guys, or, you know, that was, but it is a very, in my experience, a different style of communication. I could walk up to anybody on the shop floor or a team leader or a supervisor and say, how are you feeling today? And for me, that wouldn't be a weird thing to ask. Perhaps from a man saying, so how are you feeling today? Would be a slightly odder, you know, conversation to have. So I think there's just naturally different styles of communication. And for me, you know, and that just my background and personality, but that doesn't detract from being able to be financially savvy, commercially astute, driving projects and programs. Deadlines are deadlines. You know, we still have that, you know, that rod of iron sort of going through us because the job has still got to be done. But actually you can take people with you. You can have much richer conversations, which enable you to find out more, and people then naturally want to help you get to where the plant, the factory needs to go.
And as an unusual person that has worked in, well, he's worked in 3 different sectors now, is there a difference between across the sectors, or a lot of similarity in this respect?
I would, broadly speaking, I'd say the same. The demographic is a bit different. So, you know, part of automotive, you know, and the challenge is the fast pace and the penalties for not delivering and the cost of poor quality. And so there is a natural focus on, you know, cost, quality and delivery, which sometimes doesn't perhaps, you know, give the space to have the conversations. If you go to aerospace, on the other hand, you know, completely different. You know, most people wandering around with a cup of tea in their hand and it'll get done when it gets done, you know. So because you haven't got that usually that sort of production type of environment, certainly, you know, I was making great big forgings, so it was a very, very different process. And then, you know, moving into power generation, it was a highly skilled craftsmanship that was there. So it wasn't high volume manufacturing, but the challenge came in that those people on the shop floor were craftsmen like I've never seen before. I mean, it was an art in terms of, you know, making those generators and winding those coils. So, but I think the general themes are the same. We're all people. We all want to connect with each other, and we all feel better when communication is good. We build trust, which I think is massive.
Absolutely.
You can then have much more open conversations in a safe environment. You know, and we can celebrate the things that go well, and when they don't go so well, we learn from them rather than bollock everybody.
Love it. Do you find now, having been into wealth management and now into healthcare, which is very different again, does the style of communication change from manufacturing through to wealth management, through to healthcare. What about those three sectors?
Yeah, I think certainly in professional services, so wealth management, the financial sector, a really, really different style of communication. In my experience, very, very open, but very client centric.
Yep.
So very, very focused on quality and the
Yep.
end customer, but you haven't necessarily got that added pressure of speed of delivery.
Yep.
So I think, engagement levels, I wouldn't say are higher, but I think, you do get, a level of engagement because it's a nice environment. It's
Yep.
suited and it's booted, and there's a career pathway. I think that's
Yep.
the big difference.
Mm.
In manufacturing, people can't always see their
Yep.
route to success. In
Yep.
professional services, you're much more in control of your career destiny. And so, that creates a little bit of engagement as well. And healthcare, really different because we're dealing with the NHS significantly, but also private providers.
Yep.
It's naturally a very caring sector. And there are people in it that are, again, commercially astute, task and delivery orientated, but it is so people orientated. You can sort of feel it. It's a really, really different, really different culture.
Okay, that sounds great. So to finish off with, we can't finish this without mentioning, obviously we're recording this in, where are we, the 30th of September 2020. So if anyone's listening to this in 10 years time, this is a historical time that we're going through. We're 6 months into a global pandemic. You're working in healthcare. And I think you must be at home recording this. I'm at home recording this, and that's because half the country's in lockdown and half the country isn't. So I think we need to finish off by saying something. Now, I'm just going to talk about manufacturing because obviously I'm working with a lot of manufacturers. All my manufacturers have continued to work through the last 6 months. Some of them have furloughed some staff, but most of them have absolutely kept going because we've got to keep manufacturing going. And obviously you can't manufacture at home, so they've all had to keep coming into work. So we've got all of the protocols in place, and I'm well aware of what that's been like. So talk to me about your healthcare business that you're working in at the moment. How much has things changed for people working in your current business?
Well, for us, massively. So we went almost overnight at the end of March when Boris announced that the whole country was going into lockdown and that if you can work from home, you should. We closed all of our offices.
Wow.
We were couriering laptops and IT equipment, sorting out telephony, left, right, and centre. We're running programs for the NHS, so we're still dealing with patients. And somehow we managed as a team just to pull together. It was a bit like a war effort, if I'm honest. It was, we have no option but to do this, but we've got to keep our services to our clients going. It has to feel seamless to them. But we do need to, we need to close our offices. So we mobilized within a week, the best part of 2,000 people.
Wow.
Work from home in some way. It was quite extraordinary. And I think we've got into a way of working that is much more remote. A lot of the NHS programs are now remotely delivered. And we've managed to generate different styles of business through online. So for example, we do a lot of diagnostics now via video call rather than doctors having to go into clinics and into hospitals. So we're doing a lot of what we call insourcing. So using spare hospital capacity to run down NHS waiting lists for them where they've got behind because of the COVID pandemic. So it's created different different sort of business opportunities for us in the digital world. But remaining sort of client centric. So I think the one thing I learned kind of most about about lockdown was, you know, everybody's experience was different. And I think that was the challenge, whether you were working through or whether you were mobilizing a workforce to work remotely and all that that brought with it. There wasn't two people that I spoke to whose situations were the same. And I think it's really easy to think that everybody's like me. My kids are older, they could do all their work online. I could carry on as normal. It was, you know, we were all safe and healthy. It was fine. You know, you start really talking and communicating to people across the business who've lost members of their family, who are trying to work with young kids at home, are, you know, maybe partners have lost jobs or they've got their own business. So there's a financial pressure as well. And I think that was for me one of the biggest lessons learned in lockdown with regards to engagement and communication is just never assume two people in two situations are the same. And we've had to really coach our managers away from this one size fits all to you're going to have to manage very differently because one person's situation is so different to another. This isn't about equality, it's about equity, and we've got to take those different circumstances into account. And that's been a real challenge for managers as well, because they like a simple rule. You know, we're going to come back into the office 1 day a week or 3 days a week, or, you know, and it's the same for everybody. And so we've had to do an awful lot of work with managers around how to have conversations, and, you know, conversations that come from a place of understanding and empathy, and recognize that we might need different solutions for individuals because they've all got a different story to tell, and different fears and anxieties as well.
I tell you what, that's an amazing observation. And it's interesting listening to you just say that, because I'm thinking about some of my other clients that are not in manufacturing, and their experience is very similar to what you've described. And then I'm thinking back to my manufacturers, where actually for pretty much most of them, apart from having to implement their COVID policy, and it's a complete pain in the ass because we've got social distancing and we've got to manage all of that. People still come in and they're still making the products, and we've still got, you know, safety, quality, cost, delivery, haven't we? You know, we've still got all of that we've got to do. Whereas I don't think people in manufacturing appreciate how monumental the change has been for people in other sectors. And I'm still getting over the fact that you guys mobilized 2,000 people in a week, which I think is a phenomenal achievement. And it's interesting. I was also smiling because I'm hoping someone picks up this podcast in 10 years' time and listens to it as a bit of historical data, which I think would be bloody marvelous. Sarah, you've been a fantastic guest today. I've known you all this time, and I still was fascinated listening to your career, because I think for a guy as well as a female, but particularly for females, I would hold you up as a role model in terms of career achievement. You know, it's a 34-year-old career, which is probably only halfway through knowing you. And, you know, you've done so much into it. There's never been any barriers to you. I could imagine you being a fantastic mentor to anybody, male or female, who wanted to really progress in a corporate environment, but particularly any women who are thinking about a career in manufacturing. I would desperately love to get more women into engineering and into all levels of manufacturing. And I think you're a fantastic role model for that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure as always.